As I mentioned last week, if you have not been able to keep up with all of the sermons through this series, if you would go back to our YouTube page, and you can actually access it from the website under huffmanbaptist.org/sermons, you can go back and watch the sermons that lead up to this one, because the Elijah narrative is just that. It's a narrative. It is a storyline that flows from one event to the next, and they're all connected as we see what the Lord is doing through his life and in the life of his people. This week I was remembering back to my seminary days when we were in New Orleans. I taught for a proprietary junior college for 2 years. The owner loved to hire seminary students. In fact, the way I found out about the job was that a former seminary student had graduated and moved away, and my next door neighbor, also a seminary student and also an instructor at the college, knew that I had a background in education, so he passed the word on to me, and that's actually how I got hired. And I think probably at one time there might have been 7 or 8 of us that were seminary students working at this college all at the same time. And I always wondered, why seminary students? Because we're going to transition in and out about every 2 to 3 years. So you're always going to be having to look for new people throughout all of that. And so we were at a faculty in-service meeting, and she told us why she hired seminary students. She said, I feel like that if I am taking care of God's servants, then God is going to take care of me and my business. It was a transactional relationship that she was seeking. I'll do something nice for you, God, and hope that you will do something nice for me. And maybe that's how the widow of Zarephath felt. She had taken care of the man of God. She had given Elijah literally her last bit of food, or that's what she thought, that it was her last bit of food. But it wasn't. Because God sustained her son, and Elijah by miraculously making sure that the flour and the oil never ran out. God took care of her. So now that she and God were tight, now that she and God were besties, now that she had done something nice for God and God was obligated to do something nice for her, maybe all of her troubles were over. Surely she was in a position now to live the good life, maybe even her best life now. No worries. Be happy. But that's not what happened. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 17. After this, after Elijah had told her to go and prepare bread, to prepare a cake and bring him first, and then to feed her son and herself, and after God had supplied all of their needs, after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. Melanie and I have been binge watching one of our favorite TV shows for the past several months, since there's not been any new TV programming since the pandemic started. 16 seasons of this particular show that we like, and so we've binge watched these 2 or 3 episodes a night just leading up to, and we are now finally up to the season that would have been 2019-2020. All of these episodes are pre-COVID. And so it's interesting to watch those and remember kind of where we were last year while we were watching these same episodes. You know, December and then to January and then to February, and even the episodes that were early March, where we actually had no idea what was coming. And it's just weird to watch those episodes now and think back to even a year ago, how completely unsuspecting we were in those weeks leading up to mid-March. But you know what? Life is like that. That's the way normal life goes. We should not be surprised. Sickness and death come. We're not exempt. Trouble comes, difficulties, all because we are living in a fallen world. And that's why the whole idea of you can live your best life now, gospel, is not gospel at all. It is false. That's why the concept that God's blessings are always things that make us happy. It's just not true. The psalmist understood this. In fact, it's a psalm that most of us memorized years ago. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's not a question of if I walk through the valley. It's a matter of when I walk through the valley of the shadow. The valley of the shadow of sickness, the valley of the shadow of death, the valley of the shadow of pandemic, the shadow of trouble, the shadow of pain, the shadow of disillusionment, the shadow of disappointment, the shadow of failure. So here's the question. What do you do when you walk through the valley of the shadow? First, do not be caught off guard. Do not be caught off guard. Look again, verse 17. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." So here's the thing. Even though you didn't see the specific valley coming, don't be caught off guard. We don't know what was wrong with the boy. We don't know what the illness was specifically, but it appears that it was something that was sudden, and it appears that it was something that led to a fairly quick death. And his mother had not seen it coming. She was faithfully serving the man of God, and therefore in her mind serving God, and she was not prepared for what was just around the corner. She was not prepared for what she was going to encounter when her son became sick and died. She didn't see it coming. And she did that thing that so many of us do when we are blindsided by something that we were not expecting. She looked around for someone to blame. Somebody's got to be responsible for this. And let's face it, that's a fairly normal response. It's a normal reaction. When bad things happen, we want to blame someone. Now think about this. If you remember back when we first met the widow of Zarephath, we met her at the city gate. Elijah had been obedient to what God told him to do. He went to Zarephath, and he met this widow at the city gate. You remember what she was doing? She was collecting sticks. Now, why was she collecting sticks? Her plan was to collect those sticks, go home and build a fire, take the last little bit of flour and the last little bit of oil that she had, and make a cake. Not a big cake, just a small amount. Not even a full portion. Not even enough to feed her, let alone her and her son. And you remember what her ultimate goal was in this? They were going to eat, and then they were going to die. That was her plan. But Elijah is the one who gave her life. Well, God did it, but he did it through Elijah. Verse 16 says, the jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. So Elijah had been the hero. He was the one that kept the family alive. He had been the hero, but now he was the goat. Not the greatest of all time goat, but the scapegoat, the one to blame for the son's death. she asks the question, what have I done to deserve this? Why have you killed my son? She blames Elijah. R.T. Kendall says that the widow was going from what experts call stage 1 to stage 2 of her relationship with Elijah. All relationships go through different stages. There's that first stage, which is the veneer. It is the exterior. It is the reality that you meet someone and you are just mesmerized by them because you're just meeting them on the surface. You don't really know them yet. And she had been at that stage 1 of her relationship. Elijah was the best thing since sliced bread, or I guess in this case, baked bread. And now she's moving from stage 1 to stage 2, from the veneer to disillusionment. That moment when you're in a relationship that you think the person is just perfect, there's nothing wrong with them, they are better than Jesus. And then all of a sudden you realize they're human. You realize that they make mistakes. You realize that they are not the perfect person that you thought that they were. You've peeled back the veneer and realize they're just normal. That's where she was in her relationship with Elijah. Stage 3 is reality. It's when you have a healthy perspective. You understand and you accept the person, warts and all. And eventually she's going to get there with Elijah, but she's not there right now. She is disillusioned with Elijah. She's thinking, well, maybe you aren't the man of God that I thought that you were. She blamed Elijah. But in reality, she's blaming God for punishing her for some sin in her past. As much as she is disillusioned with Elijah, she is also disillusioned with God. In fact, probably in her mind, she is thinking something like this: God, I already had a plan. And if you'd have just left me alone, I'd have gone home, I'd have built my fire, I'd have baked my cake, my son and I would have eaten, and we both would have died, and everything would have been fine. Why did you bless me then and bring me to this point where now I'm alive, but my son is not? She's disillusioned with God. Maybe even embracing that false notion that God is somehow getting even with her, that God is somehow angry with her, and so God is punishing her for something in her past. But we know God doesn't operate that way. Yes, we reap what we sow. Yes, there are consequences for everything that we do, and yes, the wages of sin is death, but God's desire is to give us freedom from sin, to lift us out of our sin, to redeem us, to forgive us, to save us from ourselves. And sometimes the calamity or hardship is part of God's process for making us to become more like Jesus, so that we move from stage 1 or 2 to stage 3 in our relationship with Jesus. When you walk through the valley of the shadow, don't be caught off guard. Second, don't be shaken. This unexpected grief in the life of the widow led to an unexpected trial for Elijah. But it's more than just a trial. It is also another step in his preparation for what God is going to do with him in the future. And again, we're faced with a question: how is he going to respond? Well, look at verse 19. And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. Once again, Elijah finds himself in a situation that he didn't ask for, nor did he deserve. all that he has done throughout this entire process is to just be obedient to what God has told him to do. God said, go speak to Ahab. He went and he spoke to Ahab. God said, go and sit by the brook Kerith. And he went and he sat by the brook Kerith. God said, I want you to walk across the country and go to Zarephath. And he did what God told him to do. He obeyed. He has done everything that God told him to do. And as a result, he is now being blamed for the death of this child. Chuck Swindoll observed, God sometimes seems to put us in a vice, and then he tightens it and tightens it some more until we think, in the pain of his sovereign squeeze, what is he trying to do to me? You know what happens, though? With each squeeze, with each tightening of the vice, with each thing that we go through in this whole process, we are being shaped more and more into the image of Christ. We are being brought more and more into an intimate relationship with him. And we learn something about God. We learn that we can trust him no matter what. And that further prepares us for the next adventure, for that next thing that we are not ready for around the bend, for the next opportunity that God places in front of us for us to be his hands and feet. It gets us ready for what God wants to do next. Toward the end of my second year of seminary, I don't know why I did a lot of time thinking about seminary days this week. But it was actually the week before final exams of my second year of seminary. On Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from my mother, and she said, son, y'all need to come home for the weekend. Your dad is going to have open heart surgery on Monday. So we packed up our little family, and we left New Orleans on Friday evening and went the 5-hour trip to southeast Alabama for my dad's surgery. And we thought that it was going to be, he's having surgery on Monday. We'll stay through Monday. We'll come back on Tuesday. Everything will be normal. But that short weekend trip turned into days and more days. Something had gone terribly wrong. And my daddy was unconscious, and he was hooked to more medical devices than I knew existed at that time of my life. On one of those long days, as we sat in the waiting room at Flowers Hospital in Dothan, Alabama, a friend had come to spend time with me and to offer encouragement. And this is what he said. God's not going to let anything bad happen to your daddy. He knows how much you need him. Well-meaning, well-intended, just wrong. Just completely wrong. The damage was too great. And a little over a week later, my dad stepped from this reality into the reality of eternity in the presence of Jesus. Now, I got to tell you, as a young adult, a seminary student, I was devastated. This was actually the closest experience with death that I had had in my young life. I mean, I'd had extended family members, but this was immediate family. This was real. And I can tell you at that moment, the vice was pretty tight. Years later, in my first pastorate, when I walked with a family through the valley of the shadow, I was prepared. I was prepared in a way that I would not have been prepared had I not been through the valley myself. And one of the reasons I was prepared is because I knew in that moment that death was just a shadow. And unless you're 4 years old or younger, you should not be afraid of shadows. Elijah's response to this widow is pretty amazing. She's accusing him of being responsible for the death of her son. But he's not shaken. He doesn't waver. He doesn't even defend himself. He doesn't remind her, oh, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. Do you remember several months ago when you were getting ready to die? Do you not remember that I'm the one who told you to go and bake the cake and bring it to me and then bake another one for you and your son? And because of what I did, we've all had plenty of food. Do you not remember that? That's probably what I would have done. It's probably what you would have done. But that's not what he did. His response is incredibly humble, but it's also incredibly strong. Give me the boy. That's it. Give me the boy. Can I tell you, only someone who has been put to the test already, only someone who understands shadows, someone with a firm confidence in what God can do, would be able to respond the way that Elijah responded to this grieving mother. What do you do when you are walking through the valley of the shadow? Well, don't get caught off guard. It's coming. Don't be shaken. Stand firm. But instead, move under the shadow of God. Again, verse 19. And he took him from her arms, so she willingly gives the boy to Elijah. He took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. Verse 20, and he cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son? Elijah takes the boy, goes upstairs, the place where no doubt he had spent many, many hours having just these same kinds of conversations with God. His intimate spiritual place. He places the boy on the bed, and then he turns his attention back toward heaven, and he has a heart-to-heart conversation with God. Now think about it. He was silent before the grieving mother. He just said, give me the boy. But when he gets into the presence of God, he raises some really tough questions. And I'm thinking that maybe most of us have prayed similar prayers before. God, I don't understand. What are you doing here? I don't understand, and I'm not sure I can survive this. I've done everything you asked me to do. I've been faithful to the best of my ability, and now all of this? You prayed that prayer before? I have. Many times. And the interesting thing about this text is that it does not tell us that God answered. It's not recorded that God gave him an answer to the direct question that Elijah prayed. The truth is, we often don't understand all that God is doing in our lives while it's happening. It takes the perspective of time. It takes the opportunity to maybe months or even years later before we look back and we understand, okay, Lord, I see what you were doing. Man, I didn't like it in the moment. Man, I wouldn't have chosen that for myself. But God, I understand what you were preparing me for as I walk through the valley of the shadow. God did not answer that we know of Elijah's question. Lord, have you done this? Have you caused this calamity upon this woman? But somewhere in the shadow of the Lord, remember, Elijah has now moved into the shadow of the Lord. It's the Lord's presence that is over him. And somewhere in the shadow of the Lord, he understood what to do next. Verse 21. Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let the child's life come into him again. Verse 22, and the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Now, I've read some commentators who tried to go into an explanation of why it was that Elijah laid the boy on the bed, and then laid down on top of him, and you get the idea that it's hand to hand, face to face, torso to torso, leg to leg, foot to foot. They go into this trying to figure out, well, why did he do that? And some of them speculate, well, it was transferring the heat from his body into the body of the boy. I don't think it matters why he did it. I don't think it matters that he did it or that he did it 3 times. I think if it mattered, God would have told us, this is why I told him to do it. And it's not like Elijah could go back and pull out the prophet manual. This had never happened before. I mean, he was facing something that he had never experienced. Nobody on the face of the earth had ever experienced before. We have no written record of anyone ever being raised from the dead until now. He doesn't know what to do. Does that sound a little bit familiar to y'all? Any of y'all ever been through a pandemic before? No, none of us have. I mean, some of you may be close to having lived through the one in 1917. I won't call names, but there are 2 or 3 people in the room who might have been close. But when you don't know what to do, what do? You listen to the Lord. And all I can surmise from what happened was that God told Elijah somewhere in there, this is what I want you to do. We don't know why he laid him across. We don't know why he did it 3 times. What we do know is this: the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again. He was revived, brought back to life. Now, there are people in this room who've been walking with Jesus long enough that you have seen the Lord do this kind of thing before. Maybe not bring somebody back from the dead, but you've experienced the miraculous. You've been in the midst of a trial and you've watched how God somehow worked it all out. And so you hear this narrative about Elijah and you just nod your head with a quiet, yep, been there, done that, seen it with my own eyes, experienced it in my own life. You have been in the shadow of the Almighty before. Now, can you imagine the scene when Elijah comes down the stairs and back into the house, carrying the child, or maybe holding his hand? We don't know. But what we do know is that in verse 23, Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." Now again, I'm just mesmerized by Elijah's humility here. He's accused and he doesn't defend himself, even though he knows he's not responsible. Now he comes down the stairs. He's just brought the kid back to life. But he does not come down the stairs and say, "See, I told you not to worry. Look at what I have done. I have done this great thing for you. I fed you all of these months. Now I have raised your son from the dead. Look at me." Y'all know any people like that? It's not Elijah. "See, your son lives." That's it. That's his response. As you and I navigate our own valleys of the shadow, I want you to understand something. There are people who are watching. They are watching to see, is your faith real? Or is it just something you put on Sundays? Or something you celebrate when life is good? When we walk through the valley of the shadow, do we panic because we're not prepared? Is our faith shaken? Or do we move out from the valley of the shadow of our trial and under the redeeming, reviving, and refining protection of God's shadow? See, she was watching Elijah through all of this. She saw his faith. She saw his humility. She saw his determination. Verse 24 tells us that the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Stage 2 in the relationship to stage 3. Stage 2 in her relationship with God to stage 3. See, God sent Elijah to Zarephath for a reason. And I want you to know this morning that God has you where you are right now for a reason too. Wherever that is. God has you in that place for a reason. And I love the way Chuck Swindoll closes out his commentary on this passage. He says, "On the bed of your life, place the remains of your broken and scarred past, the emptiness of your poor character traits, the habits that have so long controlled you, the limited vision that continues to characterize you, the slight irritation that nags or the large one that looms, the anger or violence or lust or greed or discontentment or selfishness or the ugliness of pride. Lay these things before the Father and stretch yourself out under His shadow as you ask Him to bring about the remarkable, even miraculous changes that are needed in your life." Amen. He is able. The question for us, are you, am I under His shadow today?